Thank you, Ellie, and thanks to the rest of the events team for putting this on and for having me back for a second year as well. This is a privilege and a treat. I'm East Anglian by birth. Unfortunately, I come from Ipswich. When I was here last year, I made some derogatory comments about the state of the local football team here. Won't be doing that this year as we drop back down to the championship with a hollow thud. So thank you all so much for turning out this evening. This is a seminar about what you do once you've designed a game of some kind. I'm assuming that most of you either have designed a game or are thinking about designing games or are interested in designing games and the games industry generally. Can I just take a straw poll? Who has a game and doesn't really know what to do with it at this point? Who has ideas for games? Who's kind of generally interested in? Okay, that seems like a pretty good mix of people. People interested in the games industry in the UK, possibly looking to make a career out of it or anything. No? Maybe. It's an interesting time for the games industry generally. We'll come on to that. Hang on, I need to get that so I can kind of look at my screen and look down the barrel of that as well at the same time. So, who am I? What qualifies me to give this particular talk? I've been kicking around the games industry for about 40 years. How can that be, you say? He looks so youthful. I am old, but I did start young. I was selling articles to Warlock and White Dwarf magazine in my teens when I was still at school. In the glory days before White Dwarf was a catalogue. White Dwarf has always been a catalogue. It's just back in the day, it was a catalogue for the games that you liked. I get this, so many people, the grognards, going, oh, White Dwarf, it's not what it was. Well, yeah, and back in the 80s, Games Workshop wasn't worth £5.2 billion. For those who don't know, Games Workshop, the great success story of the British games industry, is now a FTSE 100 company. It's bigger than Aston Martin. It's bigger than Greggs. And all it makes is toy soldiers and the games to go with them and the paint. It's extraordinary. I am rambling. So I've been a games designer. These are a couple of mine. Once upon a time, myself with Andrew Ralston and Richard Lambert, we designed it. We started work on it or at least the first time I saw Andrew's very early prototype. I can date it exactly because it was a New Year party, 1990. And I said, this is brilliant. I'd like to work on this with you. And we spent 2 years just play testing and refining and polishing it and honing it. And then I was going across to a trade show in the States, Gen Con, if you know Gen Con, showed it to a few publishers out there, found Atlas Games, who said, this is great, needs more playtesting. So we continued playtesting for another 6 months. They released it at Gen Con 1993, and the world went berserk for a completely brand new style of card game called Magic the Gathering, which literally premiered at the same show we launched Once Upon a Time. We got a bit lost in the stampede to the Wizards of the Coast booth. But Atlas persevered with it. They did a second edition in 1996, and it's done 250,000 copies now. It's been out in, I think, 12 different languages. I have the Korean edition. I have the pirated Chinese edition on my shelf at home. Games piracy is a thing. It's weird. So that's one of mine. It's not so big in this country, but it was quite big in the States, very big in France. And then The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen. I'm a narrativist. I like games that tell stories. My games tend to be about storytelling, and that's what the Baron Munchausen game is. And that started off as a vanity project. I'd been running a publishing company for, at that point, 3 years. I set it up to publish my own games. We hadn't done any for commercial reasons. And it was like, well, I'll do a 24-page game then. Most of what we were doing Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, 300-page rule books and stuff. I'll do a 24-page game just so I can say I've published something with my name on it. And it was a hit. And that's the 3rd edition that came out from Fantasy Flight, who, if you know Fantasy Flight, they are the American division of Asmodee, the biggest specialist games publisher and distributor in the world. And they did it as a full-color hardback. And nobody is more surprised than me and flattered. So I've done games. I've done games of different sorts. I've done hobby games. I've done role-playing games. I've done family card games. I've written books about games as well. The one on the left has Sir Ian Livingstone's name on the cover. because it was his project. I wrote, let's be careful here, let's say quite a lot of the text. My name is in the metadata and on the inside cover. And then Everybody Wins. Board Games in 100 Moves is not a how to play, it's a history of 8,000 years of games and why the human race play them. Everybody Wins is about the modern renaissance in game design that started in Germany in the late 70s and the early 80s, and tracks it using the Spiel des Jahres, the German Game of the Year award, as a lens, looking at the winners to track trends and how things changed and when things changed. 1995, Settlers of Catan. It is as simple as, now you don't need to read it. So that's me. I've run companies. I've worked for Asmodee. I've worked alongside Games Workshop. I've run a consultancy. I'm currently in the process of setting up a trade body for the UK tabletop games industry, which will premiere at the end of this week at UK Games Expo. I've done a lot of things in the industry, and I like to think that I know it reasonably well, including how to get games published, which is what we're going to talk about. So, two main questions. What sort of game have you made? And I apologize, this is a new talk and a new slide deck, and I usually use the slides to cue off to remind me of what I'm going to say, but this is a new slide deck, so I haven't memorized it yet. So, key questions. Let's go back to it. What sort of game have you made? There's a lot of different sorts of games. Obviously, there's the genre of games. We'll come up to those. But also commercial categories of games. Is your game a family, social game? What age group does it appeal to? What markets are, what price range does it fall into? What price bracket? Who is your game for? What is your target audience? As a games designer, you need to think about these things. You need to know it. Just having an idea for a game and creating the game. I've seen a lot of games, people show me prototypes and stuff, and I go, this is a great game. 6 or 7 years ago, this would have sold gangbusters, but now it feels old-fashioned. You might find a publisher for it, but I don't think it's going to do well in the market. And that's a crying shame. But it's that kind of commercial awareness is something that you can only develop by being in the industry and immersing yourself in games for a while. Is your game any good? This is an absolutely key question. It is very hard for you as a designer to know if your game is any good. You rely on other people, particularly playtesters, and we'll come on to playtesters in a minute, to tell you not just if your game is working, but also how it's not working, if it's not working. Because as the designer, you're too close. You are emotionally invested in the game. You know why all the mechanics are in there. You know where those mechanics came from. You know why it does things in a certain way. The average player doesn't know that and doesn't care. They just care what emotions does playing this game elicit in me. And a good game should elicit an emotional reaction. You should respond to it with, ideally, pleasure. But different people get different things out of games. I like a wacky social game. I love physical games. I love stacking games, games where you put things on top of other things and then they all fall down. Absolutely my favorite type of game. I have long COVID. I can't play heavy Euros anymore. I simply lack the mental space to hold the game state in my head and do. I've just had my backside handed to me on Board Game Arena for playing Botanicus, the one about kind of Renaissance style gardening, and just couldn't hold it in my head, which is weird. But different people like different games for different reasons. They want different things out of different games. And is your game commercial? Like I say, your game may be perfectly good. It may play really well. Your friends and games group may really enjoy it, but that doesn't mean it's going to sell to a wider market. Thankfully, we are at a really interesting time in the games market. There are more people playing more games from more publishers than there have ever been at any point in history. And I mean tabletop, not digital. Because I've been kicking around this space for so long, through a lot of the 80s, for a long time, the response was, well, the days of board games are numbered. It's all video games now. Video games could do so much that board games can't. They can do all the number crunching, all the tedious stuff. Why would you sit there with stacks of counters on a board? And then the German games in particular came along and went, actually, because we can be really fun, we can do new things in new ways, and the simple pleasure of sitting around a table with friends will beat sitting around a screen almost any time. And then COVID came along, and a lot of people were reminded of how good, or discovered for the first time, how good games had got. And a lot of people expected the market to dip quite seriously after COVID ended, and it didn't. And I was watching charity shops in South London, where I live, and expected to see, mostly, frankly, I expected to see a lot of copies of Pandemic arrive on the shelves, and they didn't. People have been buying games, people have been hanging on to those games. It's a boom time for the industry. I'll come on to that. So, within the game space, this is just something I thought about earlier this week, so I'm putting it on a slide partly to remind me. There are three types of game designers, primarily. There are the innovators, the people who bring something completely new to the market space, whether it's a new combination of game mechanics or a genuinely new game mechanic. New game mechanics are incredibly rare. Everyone knows what a game mechanic is, I'm assuming, more or less. You've seen it mentioned in reviews. You've seen YouTubers talk about game mechanics. New game mechanics are very, very rare indeed. What's more usual is a new way of using an existing mechanic. Dominion, for example, the first deck building game, Donald X. Vaccarino's brilliant game of creating a small kingdom from a very small deck of cards and building your deck up, using the resources you've got to buy new cards to increase the size of your deck. And people go, oh, it's the first deck building game. No, it absolutely wasn't. Magic the Gathering is the first deck building game, and Vaccarino was a huge Magic head and had play-tested Magic variants with Richard Garfield, who had created Magic and had flown out to Wizards of the Coast and knew Magic inside out. His genius, his stroke of genius, was taking the deck building element and moving it from outside the game, the start of the game, where in Magic you assemble your deck and then you play the game. Vaccarino, why don't we move that inside the game and make that what the game is about? It doesn't sound like a massive innovation, but Dominion sold something like 3 million copies. More importantly, if you go on Board Game Geek and you type deck building game, there are about 4,000 hits. There was a complete tidal wave. There was or more of a gold rush of people creating deck building games. So that kind of innovation, which creates waves across the industry. Magic the Gathering, of course, created a massive tidal wave because it brought in an extraordinary quantity of new money in 1993. Then there are the iterators, the people who take existing games and do something new with them. And then there are the imitators who simply take existing games and just kind of tweak them or follow on or retheme. There is nothing wrong with any of these different styles of game design, but I just kind of mention that they exist. It can be useful to categorize yourself among them and to look at the way you design games, the way you approach games. But so much game design simply comes out of taking an existing game and doing something else with it, just tweaking it a bit. Twisting it a bit, noticing that there's a hole, or thinking, actually, if we retheme this to the moon, that could be really interesting. But the important thing is then to go, how would that alter the mechanics? How can we change the mechanics to make that a more interesting game? Anyway, basic types of games, board games, obviously, card games, abstract games, the classic games, typically 2 players, pieces that don't actually represent anything. You do not necessarily have a specific role within the game, except you're moving pieces around. War games and miniatures, major sector at the moment. Tabletop role-playing games, and everything else, all the awkward stuff that doesn't quite fit in those categories. And if you're designing those, then my hat's off to you, because that's the stuff I love. I love the innovation. I love the new stuff. We'll talk briefly about all of these. The major sector, particularly for the hobby area specialist games, is board games and card games. Abstract games are kind of their own thing. It hasn't happened recently, but I used to get people writing to me, to my consultancy, going, I have designed a chess variant, how do I sell it? And the answer is, sorry. You can't sell a chess variant. You might get half a page in Chess Monthly, if that's the name of the magazine. Chess variants are kind of to a penny. The only one of any note that's come out in, I think, the last 30 years was a game called Bosworth that came out from a little Midwest American company called Out of the Box. And the only reason anyone remembers Bosworth was because the game they did next was a thing called Apples to Apples, which has sold, I believe, 20 million copies. I think they sold 10 million and then they sold it to Mattel for 8 million. Yeah, that's why people remember Bosworth. It was kind of, it taught out of the box how to publish games. Abstract games is an area all to itself. There are some companies that do really well. Gigamic, the French company that's part of Hachette, do beautiful wooden abstract games, modern ones with clever design. Quarto, they're doing a lot of. They've just done a Pac-Man version of it that people really like and seems to sell. It has a niche. Wargames and miniatures, again, this is slightly its own thing. Games Workshop in particular do not regard themselves as part of the specialist hobby games industry. They regard themselves as the Games Workshop industry. They're trying to kind of ring fence what they do. There's not an awful lot of bleed between Warhammer players and the rest of the hobby. But frankly, you know, when you're talking about a small percentage, you know, 3% or 4% of a company's audience that's worth £5.2 billion, I'll take that. It's not. The tabletop hobby is not huge. In the UK, and this is a back of the envelope figure, we're probably worth, in terms of annual turnover, about £750 million. And that sounds significant, but 2/3 of that is Games Workshop. The other companies, probably the companies you love, are everything else. Almost every hobby games company in the UK, with the exception of Games Workshop, Hasbro, and Asmodee, are what the EU would classify as small, medium-sized businesses, which means, I think, less than 50 employees, less than 10 million turnover. It's not a big industry. That said, it's quite possible to make a living, or a decent living, either as a freelancer or publishing a one-off game, or actually within the industry itself. But the other categories of types of games, more like the markets, there are hobby games, which I'm guessing most of you are probably, that's the reason you're here. The kind of games that you find in specialist game shops, the kind of stuff that may well come out in the German edition. But then there's the social party games, which have been huge of late. Cards Against Humanity opened up a massive, massive sector in the market. But every so often it has been huge. Trivial Pursuit, if you remember, I mean, these days people go, oh, Trivial Pursuit. In the 80s, Trivial Pursuit was the game. Everybody had a copy of it. And it was followed by a game that has entirely disappeared called Scruples, which was... do you play it? Yes. Good Lord. But yeah, I mean, Scruples was not a bad game, but in market terms, it's kind of... it poses you kind of moral problems or questions of etiquette about how do you behave in an awkward situation. Brits love that kind of thing. And again, it was absolutely huge in the 80s. Then you've got family games, which is not the same as children's games. Family games, games that you can play with children, and then children's games are the games that children play among themselves. Licensed games, not entirely a different sector, but there is a certain skill set in designing a licensed game. Actually, there's a local role-playing game designer, Dave Chapman, who is one of the great specialists. He worked on the Buffy game. He's been line editor for the Doctor Who role-playing game, I think, since its inception about 15 years ago. Currently working on, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say, but an absolute master of taking what makes a TV program or a film interesting to an audience and translating that into game terms. And that's a skill. There are various designers who specialize in that. Matt Leacock, who designed Pandemic, did a brilliant Thunderbirds game a few years ago. I could go off on a tangent. I'm not going to because I've just glimpsed the clock. So the big question, you're here for a seminar called So You've Designed a Game. The question I should have asked right at the start, what do you want to do with that game? If you just want to sit at home and play it with your family and your friends, that's absolutely fine, but I'm not entirely sure why you've come to this seminar. The big question is, do you want to have a game published? Do you want to publish your game, or do you want to be a game publisher? Because those are three very, very different levels of things. Having a game published means that you're handing it over to a publisher. If you can find a publisher for it, they will then publish the game on your behalf. They may change it along the way because, frankly, they are likely to understand their target market better than you. If you want to publish your game, a few years ago, that wouldn't have been really an option to just publish one game. But Kickstarter and other crowdfunding platforms have made that a viable option. It's quite possible to just do one project, fire and forget, take the money and run at the end of it and go, well, I've done that, right, on to the next thing. I'll go and climb a mountain or whatever your personal goals are. Being a game publisher is a whole other level. That involves setting up a company. That involves forging links with distribution and all the rest of it. And I think, yes, I think we'll come on to those later on. But first of all, I think we should talk about the state of the market because up until quite recently, the games market has been on a steady, not spectacular, but a steady upwards growth curve. There's been consolidation. Asmodee bought up a lot of small studios and is now the largest, as I've said, specialist publisher, distributor in the world. They own the non-German rights to Catan. They don't own Carcassonne. They own Ticket to Ride. They own Pandemic, or the rights to. I don't know if they actually own the games themselves. They own a bunch of other kind of, if you're into this style of game, you will know their games. And then Trump came along. And that's the state of the market right now because the tariffs are going to set everything on their head. 80%, possibly 85% of the world's board games are made in China. The American market is probably about 50% of the world's market for games. There are almost no games factories in America because everybody outsourced to China because it was cheaper. Card games, yes, there are card publishers, card printers in the US. And as you can imagine, they are now booked up for years. Publishers, there's a group, the Tabletop Game Designers Association, TTGDA. If you are a games designer, I recommend that you look into their website and possibly join them. They do very good work. One of the things they do is contract appraisals. So if you're a freelancer or a designer working with a publisher for the first time and they've sent you a contract, TTGDA will go over that contract and go, this is fine, or alternatively, do not sign this. And they will give you reasons why. And typically, they were saying they would get about a contract a week. It wasn't a huge thing that they did. And since the tariffs was announced, Jeff Engelstein, who's one on the board, said they have received no contracts to appraise. American publishers are not signing new games right now. The trouble is there's no certainty. We don't know whether the tariffs are going to stick. We don't know if they're even going to come in any force. Trump announced last week that there would be a 50% tariff on EU goods from the EU and then quietly dropped that over the weekend. There's no certainty. There's nothing there that you can actually form a business plan on. Nobody knows what's going to happen. There are a few board game manufacturers, factories in Europe. They typically in Germany, Poland, Lithuania for some reason. And again, most countries have printing houses that can deal competently with cards. Again, these companies are massively booked up. We don't know what's going to happen. In fact, one of the things I'm doing at UK Games Expo this weekend is running a state of the industry debate, which is going to be about tariffs, whether I want it to be or not. Everyone is going to want to talk about the tariffs and how we respond to them. So it is a moment of great uncertainty. It is a moment where it is really difficult to sell a game to a publisher, unless it is a publisher with its own manufacturing facilities, or alternatively, a publisher that just doesn't care about America. And there are a few of them. There are some British children's publishers. And I'm blanking on the name, I apologize. Sorry? Orchard, thank you. I got to cherry and got stuck, which is the way my brain works these days. Orchard Games primarily sell to the UK market. That's their major thing. Are they? I had no idea they were local. Norwich actually, I mean, bats well above its weight, or punches well above its weight, because you've got Zatu as well, who are the largest mail order distributor in the UK, I believe. Largest specialist hobby retailer in the UK, anyone know? It's Waterstones. That section of games, it's in every branch of Waterstones that you go into. They are easily the largest, the dominant force in games retail. Games Workshop, of course, is, they sell Games Workshop stuff. But in the terms of the broader industry, it's Waterstones. But yeah, I suspect Orchard Games are going to be fine. Because as far as I know, they don't sell an awful lot into the US.
I think my wife is probably
We have so many battered Orchard games in our cupboards at home, can't bear to throw them out. So yes, I think there's going to, a brief anecdote. When I set up my role-playing company in 1995, Hogshead Publishing, I had witnessed a whole bunch of companies set up over the years in the UK. Games Workshop, as I mentioned, pulled out of the role-play and hobby market in about 1998 in order to focus just on Warhammer and just on miniatures. But because they'd been the primary distributor in the UK up to that time, that basically ripped the heart out of the British industry, and it took a long time to rebuild. New distributors had to set up and forge links with American publishers, and it did come together. But a lot of role-playing companies set up with great games, not realizing that the UK was not large enough to support a role-play company. But because I'd been working for American companies, I understood that, and so I went, I'm going to be an American company to all intents and purposes. We were a limited company based in London. I was living in Clapham at the time, but we printed everything in America. We warehoused everything in America. We priced everything in dollars. We ran an American bank account. We operated our office hours on an American time schedule, so that American distributors could phone us up and we'd answer on the third ring. And it worked. And we became the largest RPG publisher in the UK in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then I burnt out because I was working 2 other jobs at the time. I overcommit much. So it can be done. If a company came to me now and said, what should we do? I'd say focus on Europe. Find manufacturing in China by all means. Do not treat the US as a primary or even a secondary market. Focus on Europe, which has an amazingly well-developed board game, hobby game market, stronger, arguably, than the UK. The new wave of games that I wrote about in Everybody Wins came out of Germany. The UK had been the center of the world board game market in the 60s and 70s. And then the country hit an economic downturn just as the market was getting overcrowded and overheating, with new companies coming in with less good games. And the result was the whole thing imploded. Most of the decent companies went to the wall, and the stage was free for the Americans to come in. And most of those companies that existed at the time sold out. Not immediately. Waddington's, for example, held out for a while. I think they sold out to Hasbro in 1994. Waddington's, probably you younger people may not remember Waddington's, but they were the British licensee for Monopoly from the inception of Monopoly in the mid-30s. They introduced Cluedo to the world market in the 50s, and sold it to the Americans. Great British games like Buccaneer and some people go, Waddington's, the Great British Games Company. No, they were a packaging company. They made packaging materials. Their world-beating board games were never more than 15% of their turnover. And finally, they sold out to a packaging concern. But they sold the board games to Hasbro in the early 90s. But the Germans have come through, and there's an amazingly robust and well-developed market in Germany, in France, in Spain, in Italy, across the Nordics as well. The UK is a decent size, but you have to look overseas these days. Anyway, I'm just I think I'm getting ahead of my slides. Let's talk about having a game published. So you've got a game design. A lot of people come at it thinking it's like books. It's sort of like books, but it's not really like books. There used to be games agents who you could, would represent your game to publishers. And I know a number of people in the 70s and 80s who sold games to UK publishers that way. I don't know of any who currently exist, none necessarily that are reputable. I do know that of the ones that I used to know, they would take 50%. A typical book agent will take 15%. So you will need to find a publisher. There are a bunch of them. In the UK, in the US, they're not taking, in Germany as well. The best thing to do is look at the websites for the companies who publish games a bit like yours, or in the same kind of area, or particularly appealing to the same kind of player that your game will appeal to. Most games companies of any size will have a section on their website about how you pitch a game to them. Some in just like 1 or 2 paragraphs, some simply say, we're not taking any pitches at this time. Then you need to pitch the game to them. We'll talk about pitching later on. You will need to get the game into a publishable form, possibly working with the publisher, or it's possible they may just take it and run with it. And you'll need to be available to promote the game as well. Again, this doesn't work like books. The authors of games are not major stars. Actually, in Germany, they kind of are. Wolfgang Kramer, Klaus Teuber, who created Settlers of Catan, they are treated as not superstars, but they have a degree of celebrity. Ask people in the UK to name a games designer, and they will look at you as if you are mad. But we do exist. There's 20 years ago, getting your name on the cover of a games. Start again. Getting your name on the cover of a game on the box was unusual. But there's actually a German union, pretty much, that campaigns specifically for that. Most publishers have come around. There are certain publishers who still won't. But people are understanding that if you enjoy a game by a certain designer, then you're likely to buy other games by that designer as well. So it's building into that kind of model. There's a lot of games out there. The publishers know what they want. They know what they can sell. And because this is a hobby, this is an industry that comes out of a hobby, most people working in the industry do understand and to an extent love games, and they will publish the games, particularly the smaller companies will publish the games that they love. If they see a game and they feel an attraction to it, this is how it worked with Atlas Games. John Nephew at Atlas fell in love with Once Upon a Time. They didn't do card games, they were a role-playing publisher, but they decided to take a punt on it because they loved the game, and it paid off for them. You can't rely on that. You can't rely on finding a publisher that will necessarily love your stuff. If it happens, fantastic. They will champion your game through the hard years. Anyway, so that's the process of having a game published. We'll go into more of those steps later on. Publishing a game yourself. Well, the hard part is knowing when your game is ready, knowing whether it's marketable, whether it's commercial, whether it's done. The temptation as a solo designer, and I know this all too well, is to keep tinkering, thinking, well, maybe the next iteration will fix that thing. Once upon a time, we've done 1/3 copies. I can only see the flaws in it. I am still trying to fix a couple of rules kludges that we built into it. One of my principles of design is that if you're designing something and something doesn't quite work, don't introduce a new rule to make it work. Take the rule out entirely and see if it'll work without it. Simplify. The Antoine de Saint-Exupéry quote of something is... I'm blanking on it. It's I think it's like a piece of art is only complete not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. It's like sculpting. Game design for me is like sculpting. It's about taking stuff away rather than adding stuff in. So knowing when your game is ready, but play test and play test and play test and play test. Then you need to create a commercial version, meaning the version that you will send to the printers and use to publicize it, commercial qualities of art, commercial standards of graphic design, and just commercial presentation, generally commercial box sizes. There are certain retailers who will only stock certain box sizes, because the old long boxes that were around when I was a kid, which you still see in secondhand game shops or charity shops, big boxes of Monopoly, those don't sell anymore because they're really difficult to shelve. And if you're shipping stuff, you can fit an ordinary game. An ordinary game will take up 1/3 of the space of one of those, so you can fit 3 times as many into a container, which when you're calculating shipping costs from China is really important. So there are specialists out there who will work with you on this. You'll need to create a commercial version. You'll need to work out how you're going to promote it. Simply because a game exists is not a reason for it to succeed, because it's not just the public that you need to tell exists, it's also retailers, it's also distributors, if you want to go down that route. Printing, shipping, and distribution, these are all things you're going to need to think about. Again, there are people out there who will help you. There are a number of the Chinese companies that have representation in the UK, and the one I always recommend, because Tyler, who's their main UK rep, is fantastic, is Panda. Panda are a Chinese factory, but as I say, they exist over here, and they will just hold your hand through the entire process. They will explain how publishing works, how to do everything, how to create a market-ready game. They will help you with the publishing. They will help you with the shipping. Once you've got the copies, to your port of destination, the rest is up to you. But Panda will help you with pretty much everything else. And then distribution. Again, if you're going that route, the industry exists in 3 tiers. You've got the publishers, you've got distributors, and then you've got retailers. Publishers tend to sell into distribution. They may sell to larger chains of retailers. Some publishers sell direct to customers, but don't tend to do that except at trade events like UK Games Expo. Sorry, I did a 2.5-hour workshop before this. My throat is incredibly dry. And I'm going hoarse. It's not like there's a 4-day major games event at the end of the week or anything. So if you're setting up, and this is partly actually for the next one, if you're setting up a games company, then you will primarily be selling to distribution. If you're going through Kickstarter or crowdfunding, then you're primarily selling to end customers. And the question, once you've published a game, is, and the game is out there and presumably it's sold through, keep it going. Do you keep it going? Do you publish expansions for it? Typically an expansion. The rule of thumb is always you'll sell half as many copies of an expansion as you will of the base game. So it can be tricky. Or do you do another game? A lot of people at this point get the bug. They discover they really enjoy it and they keep going. I discovered Dungeons & Dragons in 1982. 6 months later, I started my first fanzine, and I discovered that what I really loved was writing about games and publishing stuff about games and pushing it out there. And that's been a chunk of my career ever since. So crowdfunding, let's talk about crowdfunding. Everyone knows what crowdfunding is. Just anyone not know? Platforms like Kickstarter, or there's a number of them out there these days. Crowdfunding is absolutely great because it cuts out those 2 middle tiers of the games industry. It's you and your product selling direct to people who want to buy it in one at a time. It is a great way to test the water to see if your game idea is commercial, if it's got a market. They will give you the money up front. You finish your kit. You need to create the game. You need to have a game that you can show off to people, either in videos, or you'll need to send prototypes out to playtesters so they can give you, or reviewers who can give you comments that you can use as part of the Kickstarter campaign. But once you've committed to that expenditure, you're not having to pay for production. You do not have to run the factory. It used to be, back when I was publishing role-playing games, the way you discovered is if your role-playing game was commercial is you printed 3,000 copies of it and saw, you pre-sold it to some distributors. But ultimately, the acid test was you take out a bank loan and print however many it is. Kickstarter, you get the money up front to cover your production costs, but costs change. And they can change very fast and very radically. The tariffs is one example. The other one is shipping costs from China. Shipping has been going up steadily over the years, but I was working for Asmodee during COVID. I was running an imprint that they'd recently acquired called Green Board Games, and we manufactured everything at Asmodee's factory in China. Asmodee owns a factory in China, but it doesn't own a shipping line. So at the start of COVID, which is literally when I started my job, we were paying, I think, just under £3,000 for a 40-foot container, which is the standard container size. Within 8 months, we were paying £19,000 for the same container. And it's simple supply and demand. And COVID finished and shipping went back to normal and the prices came down a bit, because the shipping companies had suddenly realized that they'd essentially been undercharging. One of the reasons that the price of everything went up, or many things. So costs, if you had started a Kickstarter, assuming you've done the costings, shipping's that $3,000 a container, and then suddenly you discover that actually you're having to pay 6 times that, that's a substantial loss that you're going to be making. One of the reasons that Kickstarters go down is because manufacturing costs change, shipping costs change, and because a lot of people doing Kickstarters, it's their first project. They haven't anticipated that. They haven't built in contingencies. Running a Kickstarter, putting a Kickstarter page together, it is a science. There are experts on this. Do not trust anyone who comes to you, who cold calls you about it or sends you an email going, hello, I see you're thinking of running a Kickstarter. I'm an expert. No, you're not. But one of the great things, one of the reasons that I love this industry is it's really friendly. It understands the principle that a rising tide lifts all boats. A good game is good for everyone. A company failing or a game failing is not good for anyone. It just drags the industry as a whole down. So people are very free with advice, and typically it's good advice. I will sit down with anyone. People were amazingly generous with their time with me when I was starting out, first as a freelancer and then as a publisher. And, I'm passing that on as much as I can. And I think certainly a lot of the UK industry will do that as well. We are happy to talk to you, to tell you what we know and to advise you. So getting your Kickstarter page right, it's interesting. Essentially, are you selling the game or are you selling a dream of a game? Because people can't necessarily, and sometimes people doing a Kickstarter will supply print and play rules so you can test the game out at home. You would be surprised how few people download them. It's important to have them. It's like the videos on Kickstarters. Only about 50% of people who visit the page who back the project watch the video. But you need to have the video. If you go to a Kickstarter page and there's no video, then what amateurs are these? But then people don't watch the videos. It's odd. And the video needs to be nicely produced as well. It needs to be put together to a professional quality because that's what people expect these days. To do a Kickstarter, essentially, you're selling a dream, but at the same time, you can't say, I have this dream of doing a game and throw money at me. No, you have to say, I've developed this game and it's brilliant, and we just need the final tranche of funding to get us over the edge, because that makes it feels like it'll get there. People don't back Kickstarters if they think the Kickstarter's going to fail. It's why? I don't know. Give them, if the Kickstarter fails, you're not out any money, but I always back a project no matter how hopeless it seems, if only to give them a little bit of moral support. There's a trick as well. People don't back Kickstarters if they look at, there's that little indicator that's, the person who is running this Kickstarter, this is their second Kickstarter project. They have backed no other Kickstarters. There's a bunch of people, there's a percentage of people who will go, well, they're not part of the ecosystem, then I'm not backing this. You can run up your backed number by backing projects that you know are going to fail. It won't cost you anything. It is a trick. You can do it. I just put that out there. Kickstarter itself, so it's a science. It's also strangely addictive. It's great. Running a Kickstarter is amazing. The first Kickstarter I ran, I broke my F5 key. Kickstarter pages refresh automatically. I didn't care. I was hammering that thing. And you feel you've made a massive success, and then you discover that you've massively overpromised on the stretch goals. There's a discipline to it as well. But there are companies, quite successful companies, that just do Kickstarters these days. That's all they do. That's their entire model. It's a very solid model these days. It's worth thinking about. And then there's being a games publisher, and this is a commitment. It doesn't have to be a full-time thing. I built Hogshead Publishing up to the point where it had 3.5 employees, none of whom was me, because I was on the Sunday Times at the time. And I was going into the office evenings and weekends, which is no way to run a business. And I finally went, this is ridiculous, and sold the company. But you need to approach it, if this is what you want to do, as a business. An awful lot of people come into it with a hobby frame of mind. Oh, I'll publish games I love. I'm not going to publish any game that I don't absolutely believe in. Yeah, and that can work if you're publishing the right games, but retailers and distributors are going to expect a steady flow of product from you, or they're going to assume you're out of business and will stop reordering. Hard truth. You need to know what else you're going to publish. What other style of games? Where do you draw a line? What markets are you going to cater to initially? What's your primary market? Are you going to try and do translations yourself? Are you going to make deals with foreign companies in those territories? The advantage is there's a lot of them. My Baron Munchausen game has technically been out of print since 2020. I still get calls from Europeans occasionally going, I'd like to do a Spanish edition. Actually, there is a Spanish edition. You know, they'll come to you. If you've got an interesting game and people like it, people will hunt you down. But it is a commitment. Again, you've got printing, shipping, and distribution to think about, forming relationships with printers, setting up a warehouse. The great advantage of Kickstarter is you only need a temporary warehouse. Again, there are specialist fulfillment houses that will take your shipment. You know, your shipment arrives at Dover or Southampton. You send it straight to the fulfillment house along with a list of all your Kickstarter backers, and they deal with sending it all out. Probably. Because transatlantic shipping, even before the tariffs, transatlantic shipping was weird. The last Kickstarter I did, it was a book. We actually did we worked out it was cheaper to do 2 separate print runs of the same book, one in the US for Kickstarter backers in the US and one in the UK for the rest of the world. Because it is cheaper to ship a book to Canada from the UK than it is from America. I can't explain why. I can actually, it's really tedious. But yeah, but you need to know this stuff. And a fulfillment house will know that stuff. And suddenly you don't need to worry about warehousing anymore. But if you're running a games publisher, then you do need to think about warehousing. More than once when I was running a role-play company, I would get phone calls from people going, hello, I've just received a shipment of 3,000 role-playing games and they're in my garage. What do I do now? And the answer was, well, 6 months ago, you should have started soliciting orders from distribution. Again, there are ways to do this. If you're going to be a games publisher, be aware it is setting up a business and you need to treat it like a business and you need to understand the bigger industry. There are trade shows. Well, there's a trade show at the moment. It's called the Gamma Trade Show. It happens in America once a year. And who knows what's going to happen to it next year. I think attendance is going to be way down. There may be a European trade show in the near future, but I can't say too much about that at the moment. But in terms of business-to-business events, there's the London Toy Fair. Don't take a booth at the London Toy Fair. You're throwing your money away. They're interested in toys and social family board games. Orchard do really well there. Paul Le Monde games, licensed games do really well. But if you're trying to sell hobby stuff, Alley Cat, if you know Alley Cat, bless them, always take a tiny stand in the incubator area. I don't know if they do any business out of it at all, but they're always there. Games Workshop are always there. Asmodee are always there. That's about it for the hobby at the London Toy Fair. So understand the bigger industry. Luckily, as you'll discover, people in the industry love to talk about the industry. I mean, buy me a drink. Sadly, I'm on an 8:30 train home, but I'd be here all evening. UK Games Expo is it in the UK. That's the big one. 66,000 people last year attended UK Games Expo. That's the second largest English language show in the world now. It dwarfs everything in America except Gen Con. And Gen Con's going to be way down, thanks Trump. That's a genuine thanks Trump, you know. What good? Go UK Games Expo as far as I'm concerned. Though now I'm afraid my friend Peter Atkinson, who owns Gen Con, is going to see this. So, okay. Big shows are good. They're good for everything. They're a fantastic showcase for companies of all sizes. They put you on an equal footing. You may be in a tiny booth, but people are still going to be walking past you on their way to the bigger booths. The biggest show in the world is Essen, Spiel Essen in Germany at the end of October each year. That last year was 205,000 people. And the reason it was 205,000 is because after somebody had bought the show, the ownership of the show changed hands, and they went to Essen City Council and said, is there a limit on how many people we can let in? They went, yes, 200,000. They went, oops, we may have sold more tickets than that already. Essen is colossal. It's dwarfing. If you want to, before you think about setting up a games publisher or even publishing your own game, go to Essen just to get a sense for how big this industry is in Europe. The story I told, sorry, John, I told John this story earlier on. My first Essen was 1996 to support Once Upon a Time, which had just come out in a German edition, or was just about to. I then didn't go for 20 years, and I went back in 2016 going, I can do this, I've been here before. And after 3 hours, I had to go back to my hotel room and lie down because my brain was full. I could not assimilate any further information about board games I had never seen before. And I was genuinely overwhelmed. I have been writing professionally about board games since I was 18 years old. It was the weirdest feeling, and I was genuinely worried that I had burnt my brain out in 3 hours. Essen is extraordinary. But yes, so there is a huge industry out there. They will happily give you advice. But be aware of it. It may well be that if you're setting up a company, the UK may be the market you know, but it may not be the best market for your game, for your style of game. It's worth talking to an expert or a consultant. Playtesting. Playtesting your games. Whatever state your game is at, whatever you're thinking of doing with it, playtesting is absolutely key. You're probably aware of that. There are 3 stages of playtesting any game design. First of all, you test it with yourself, just to make sure that all the logistics work, that there are no holes in the rule. You play all the pieces, you make sure the numbers add up, the internal economy works. There's no runaway winner, that the bank doesn't run out of money. And then you test it with friends, people whose opinions you know and trust, and tell them to be brutal with you. Because advice like, well, you've clearly put a lot of work into this, so well done, that is no use to anyone. What you want to hear is, it is very boring being purple, and that whole sub-game out of there is pointless, get rid of it, it's just dull. You need to know that stuff as the designer, because you need to make the hard changes. The most valuable resource in all of gaming is playtester feedback, so absolutely value that. Thankfully, there are a couple of groups that can help you, particularly there's Playtest UK. I don't know if they have a Norwich chapter, but Playtest UK is a nationwide group. They exist mostly as a Facebook group and a meetup group. Anyone can form a chapter, and they're just games designers, professional and amateurs, who meet up on a regular basis to test each other's designs and give them honest feedback from a designer point of view. A great many of playtesters. Anyone here a member of Playtest? Anyone been to any of their meets? I'm seeing some nodding and some pencils. They are fantastic. They have a big presence at UK Games Expo next week. Most of the major shows, they have a presence. They are, again, open and accessible people who will be happy to talk to you about stuff. Playtest are absolutely great. There's also UK Tin, who are less about the playtesting side, but more about the first steps in getting your game together as a publishable thing. The other thing about playtesting is knowing when to stop, knowing when your game is good enough. The temptation is just to keep fiddling, as I think I said. And I know people who have been fiddling at games for 15 years and occasionally bring them along to playtest meets, and you have to just say, no, it's good enough. You enter as an area of diminishing returns really quite quickly. Some games come together really fast, some don't. There's no orthodoxy about it. Once Upon a Time, as I said, was in playtest for 2.5 years. My Baron Munchausen game, I had the idea in the shower. I took it to one convention in Cambridge, played it twice. It went so well that I published it as was. Other games designers hate me for that story because I don't know anyone else who's ever done that, and I expect it to never happen to me again. But it was like a bolt of lightning. On the other hand, I had been trying to do a conventional role-playing game based on the Baron Munchausen stories for 2 years leading up to that. It was just standing in the shower. I recommend showers for that kind of dissociated liminal space thinking. Going, well, the reason my Munchausen game never works is because the Munchausen stories never happen in real life. They're just told by the Baron over a drink next to a roaring fire. I need to design a role-playing game about telling stories over a drink. Bang! 3rd edition is a full-colour hardback from Fantasy Flight. It can happen. I don't think it... You do not rely on it happening. Expect that you'll do a lot of playtesting. Your games will spend a lot of time in playtest. Some designers, Rainer Knizia, everyone know Rainer's work? Reiner has 50 games in playtest at any given time. He has a filing system for them. It used to be 25, and then COVID hit, and he went up to 50. And he's not working on all of them all of the time, but he'll have an idea. He'll pull it out, he'll amend it, he'll take it to his regular playtest group, he'll work a bit further on it. He's had over 800 published games. He is a machine. He is... I swear, standing next to Reiner, you can hear the low hum of a supercomputer in the background. He's just phenomenal. Anyway, but I recommend getting in touch with Playtest or possibly getting together and setting up a Norwich branch of Playtest. Prototyping. That's the wrong slide. Okay, let's talk about prototyping. I apologize, I was editing this on the train and may well have edited the wrong version. Prototyping, putting a prototype together. The temptation is to make your game as beautiful as it can be. But the fact is, in prototyping, while you are playtesting the game is going to change. So it's a good idea to have some art in there that kind of sets the tone that you think the game should have. At the same time, do not commission thousands of pounds worth of art for your game at this point. Not least because if you're going to take this to a publisher, the publisher is almost certainly going to replace all their art and with the stuff that they think is commercial. Do people know Mysterium? The game that came out from Libelud a few years ago. It's literally, Mysterium, you look at it, you play it the first time, and you go, very clearly the designers sat down and went, what happens if we take Dixit and Cluedo and smash them together? It is literally Dixit meets Cluedo. You're solving a mystery, but you're all psychic detectives, and the ghost is communicating details to you in your dreams through cards with abstract, surreal art on them. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's originally, okay. I'm going to take that slide down because it's just kind of off-putting, having the wrong slide up there. It's originally a Ukrainian game, pre the whole Russian invasion thing, and had gorgeous, slightly gothic artwork to it. And then Libelud, the French publisher, got the rights, the English and French rights, and redid a lot of the art because they knew what would sell in Europe. I prefer the Ukrainian edition. I'm not the mass market. And Mysterium has sold, I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands of copies rather than millions of copies, but it's been a bona fide hit and is a brilliant game. I still think the Ukrainian one is better. It's Libelud added in more rules. Don't do that! The original was just sleeker, better. Anyway, so don't spend your hard-earned money, unless you're an artist, by all means put the work in. Particularly if you're a graphic designer, put the work in, because the UI, the user interface of games, is incredibly important. How a game transmits information to its players is absolutely key. Matt Leacock, who designed Pandemic, used to be a UI designer, and I think it absolutely shows when you look at the design of Pandemic. Pandemic is a complicated game for people who aren't used to complicated games, and how it communicates the information about how the game works and the game state and all the rest of it is quite brilliantly set out. So that kind of stuff needs to be in there for creating your prototype, but certainly your early prototypes before the game has come together, before you have locked your version, your final version or almost final version. Keep the production values low. By all means, use scrappy cards. I used to. When we were doing Once Upon a Time, we literally laser printed, we photocopied the cards. We using public domain etchings and woodcuts of the illustrations. And that was enough to get us, to open the doors to a number of publishers and finally get us a deal with Atlas. Atlas then immediately scrapped all the work that we had done on the graphic design. But there comes a stage, once you've locked the design, once you are happy, you're going, okay, this design is now commercial, it is ready to be pitched, you will need to create a proper prototype. Or particularly if you're taking it to Kickstarter, you will need to create a version that looks commercial. It may not be the final commercial version. And for that, you'll need to create physical copies. There are various ways of doing that. You can kind of assemble it yourself. There used to be, I said Norfolk punched above its weight, there used to be a fantastic educational supplier called Witzigs. They went out of business earlier this year. They would sell you 1,000 blank white cards for a tenner. I cannot tell you how many thousands of cards of theirs I went through. They would sell counters, packs of 200 six-sided dice, loads and loads of stuff. There was a while where they were selling sets of polyhedral dice, the Dungeons & Dragons style of things, for 90p for a set. They were really cheap. But if you're prototyping, or if you're running workshops, as I do, that's incredible. The best source for stuff like meeples, if you're just looking for generic meeples of, well, either generic meeples or, you want horses. You want horses pulling cart meeples. You want alien meeples. You want Spielmaterial in Germany. Spielmaterial.de will sell meeples of, it's on a slide later on, assuming I put that in this deck, rather than the other deck, which is somewhere. They are the best source for meeples I'm aware of in the world. If you go to Essen, they just have this enormous space, and it's like pick and mix for meeples. It's games people just go completely nuts for it. They also they do mad dice. My favourite thing of theirs I've ever bought, which they seem to have stopped doing now. It's a 14-sided dice, and it has the 7 deadly sins and the 7 virtues printed on it. Why? I don't know. Does it sit on, beside my laptop at all times? Yes, it does. Do I occasionally roll it during phone calls when I'm bored? Yes. But anyway, build material for getting that kind of stuff. But when you're doing printing stuff, actually printing or preparing printed cards, there are guides online. There's a little company in Sheffield called Dice Sports. Dice Sports? Do check with me later on. Their website looks like nothing, but they prepare brilliant prototypes. They will print you up. Because if you're doing one, you probably actually need 5 or 10, because you're going to need to send them out to potential publishers, particularly if you're publishing. Publishers will ask for prototype copies of things, and you're going to need multiples, because if you've only got one, you're in trouble. Anyway, and at that point, you need to do something that's good looking. It does not need to be original art. As I said, it doesn't need to be art that you own the rights to, because this is not for commercial use. You're not publishing this form of the game. It is okay to use art that you've got from somewhere else, just as long as you make it absolutely clear to the publisher that you do not own the art in the game. But it's fine to use that if it's the right art, if it sets the tone, if it captures the mood of the game you want. It can happen that a publisher comes back and goes, "We really like that art used. What's the name of the artist?" You have to scrabble through and then they will commission that artist to actually do the art for your game. I've seen that happen. And then pitching. There are various ways to get pitches. Obviously, during COVID, most pitching was online. These days, pitching tends to be face-to-face. It tends to be at games events. In particular, in the UK, we have a fantastic resource, the Mojo Pitch. Mojo Nation is a small agency that exists essentially to connect tabletop creators with the tabletop industry. And that does mean family games and social games as well as hobby games. Hobby games comparatively is a small market. But the Mojo Pitch happens, I think, once a year as part of their conference, but it's pay to play. You will need to pay to attend. Publishers also pay to attend. They have stands. Designers come along and pitch them games, but that's all it is. It's designers pitching games to publishers, and you say in advance which publishers you'd like to pitch to. It is an extraordinary resource because you can do a year's worth of pitching in a day. And a lot of my designer friends have had big success there. As I say, it tends more towards the mass market stuff than the hobby stuff, but there are still hobby publishers there. It depends. Typically, some they're 5 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour. I've pitched to Hasbro a couple of times. Those were half-hour pitches. No, it's if they like, you'll have submitted. Typically, you'll put together a one-page in advance of actually pitching. This your initial approach. Well, your initial approach is: are you accepting pitches? and they'll come back to you, they will typically ask for a one sheet. And the one sheet is just, there's a template for them online. You can find examples of people's one sheets. It just boils down what your game is, not necessarily how it plays. You're not explaining the rules, but the high points of gameplay, how many components it's got, what's going to be in the box, because that's going to set the retail price. So when I say take stuff out of a game design, what I mean is, you know, you can reduce the price. If you can take 10 meeples out, that may well knock $5 off the retail price. That's important. Publishers do consider that stuff. So customize your pitch depending on who you're publishing, who you're pitching to. The different companies will require different levels of pitch. Rehearse it to yourself, rehearse it to friends. You know, basically do dry runs of the pitch. If you know a games publisher, say, can I rehearse a pitch to you? Again, it's a friendly industry. We want to see you succeed. Stack the deck. If you've got a deck of cards in there, stack it so the cards that you want to come up are going to come up in the pitch. The number of pitches I've been to and I've seen people shuffling that, what are you doing? You've just randomized the game. No. The whole point of a pitch is you are showing the publisher the high points. A publisher is not concerned. They want to know that it's a good game, but they want to know that it's a game they can sell. They want to know, they are waiting for you to make them excited by the game. They're not waiting for you to explain the knotty rules point on page 8 of the rules. They want to know the high points. They want to know why this game is going to excite them and why it's going to excite retailers and punters. So you're not telling them how to play, you are selling a product. At this level, it's very much about the product rather than the game. We are gamers, we love games. There's a good chance the publisher is also a gamer who loves games, but they also have to think about the commercial end of things first of all. And I've had games rejected for the stupidest reasons. One of the pitches I made to Hasbro was a drawing game, and they went, sorry, Pictionary exists. And I went, this is nothing like Pictionary. I went, no, but the rights to Pictionary are a bit knotty between us and Mattel in different territories. And Mattel will, if we publish another drawing game, then the rights to Pictionary become difficult. And we're not going to endanger the rights to Pictionary. So, sorry. And yeah, that was a short pitch to Hasbro. So, yeah, I've not had any success pitching to Hasbro. Bear in mind that the larger the games company, the greater the number of pitches they're going to get. Hasbro get thousands upon thousands of pitches a year. Your chances of selling to Hasbro are very small, particularly with the first game. Establish a track record, establish a CV of other designs, and move on from there. It also really helps if you've got a track record, if you've got an in at Hasbro. Hasbro, a bit like Games Workshop, they're very much kind of a walled fortress. They deliberately make it difficult to contact them. That's part of the point. Demonstrating a game, whether you're demonstrating it to a potential publisher or to the public, it's an art. Demonstrating games. Again, people want to know the high points of a game. They may not have time to sit through the entire game. Absolutely the best way to learn a game is from the designer, because the designer is the one who not only understands it, but should also understand how to explain it, how to explain the rules. Once Upon a Time has 4 tightly typed or tightly printed pages of rules. I can explain Once Upon a Time in 90 seconds. I have been doing it for quite a while. But you should have that down. You should have the explanation absolutely down and know what cards or what types of card you're going to show to illustrate as you're talking. You need to know how to explain the rules. You need to hit the high points of the game. What makes this game exciting? What makes it different? I've seen people get the games, they've come for a demo, suddenly realize they don't have time, but they've heard the explanation, they buy the game on the spot. So hit the high points. Again, only go into the knotty rules bit on rules on page 8 if you think it's going to come up actually playing the game itself. And absolutely crucially, let them do well. They don't have to run away with a victory, but don't beat them. And in particular, don't beat them hard. They will not buy your game if you have just hammered them at it. Various resources. Books and podcasts on game design. Books. The other thing is you learn about games by playing games, fundamentally, and you learn about games design by designing games. but also by talking to people about games, expanding your vocabulary of different mechanics and how they're used differently and different techniques and different approaches. There are great books and great podcasts out there on the subject of games, mentioning no YouTubers in particular, even the ones in this room. Spiel Material, I mentioned, that's how you spell it. Just browse their website, it's fantastic. It is also home to the least funny comic strip I have ever encountered in any language. I've yet to see one where I've really understood where the joke is. It's very odd. Playtest UK, I've mentioned, the Playtest Network. UK TIN, Tabletop Industry Networking, if you are thinking of either working commercially in the industry or setting up any kind of small publishing company. They specialize in role-playing games. The thing about, I was going to talk briefly about role-playing games. Do people here have role-playing games? Role-playing game designers? One. Okay, I'll do this very briefly then. Role-playing games are completely different. The market is utterly different because bringing a board game to market requires a good deal of investment. Oh, I should mention also there is the Games Crafter in America, which I believe is unique. They are a print-on-demand board game company. You can set up your game with them digitally, you send them the files, you upload them on the internet, and then you can print one copy, and it will cost you $35, depending on what's in the box. If you're trying to do that with a Chinese factory, that one copy will cost you somewhere in the region of $4,000 or $5,000, because it's an industry that scales, and you'll be setting up molds. Games Crafter is set up for print on demand. The trouble is they're in America, so the shipping costs are horrible. You'll pay $35 for the game, and then you'll pay $45 to get it to the UK. They are, as far as I know, the only company in the world that does that. There are others that claim to and don't really, they outsource stuff. With role-playing games, because role-playing games are book-based fundamentally, the print-on-demand model is already there, and it's much less, you don't have to have the physical thing. It's pivoted to a PDF model. A large chunk of the market is there. So you can have an idea, spend an evening, bang it together, get some copyright-free art, save it as a PDF, have it on sale the same day. You'll still need to market it. That is, and that's really the trick. Putting it on sale, anyone can do that. Drawing attention to it is the trick. And that's why an awful lot of role-playing games go through Kickstarter, because Kickstarter does a degree of marketing for you. It brings prominence to it. But the other thing to do is send copies or approach podcasters, influencers, bloggers, people in the industry. Say, I've done a game, would you like a copy? Almost everyone will say yes. Not all of them, very few of them will actually give you the publicity. But, you're sending them PDFs. It costs you nothing. So role-playing games are completely different. I would say if someone is starting a small role-playing company, start with PDFs. Make sure that the ideas you've got are commercial. Start building a following. Start building a base. That's the other thing about Kickstarter. Kickstarter will not bring you an audience necessarily. These days, they used to, but these days you need to take an audience to them. You need to build up your social following. You need to build up an awareness of the game in advance, possibly by demoing it at games events, possibly by getting profiles on podcasts or YouTube channels. Is it dry in here, or is it just me? Yeah. Mojo Nation and the Mojo Pitch, I've mentioned. Again, that's how you spell that. And then Space is my consultancy. I run a consultancy. This is pretty much the last slide. I'm happy to talk to you about this. First meeting's free. If you decide you want a business relationship at that point, we can talk about whatever rate it is. But if you haven't gathered already, I am more than happy to just blather about the industry and how it works until the cows come home. I'm in this industry. I could make a lot more. Should I say this? I was at school with two people who went on to become Prime Minister. I played chess with one of them. I am making a lot less money than most of my peers. I am absolutely certain I enjoy my life so much more than they do. I have so much fun in the games industry. It is a lovely, lovely place to work. There's not that much money, but then you can suddenly, yes, it sold 1/3 copies. You split that 3 ways and split that out over 30 years. It's not really that much per year. you can have a hit. It can happen. Games can just catch light. I don't think anyone was expecting Gloomhaven to go as big. Certainly not the designers. It's on Kickstarter. Board games are the largest sector. They are consistently the largest sector. They dwarf video games. They dwarf all the other sectors. It is now routine. It happens multiple times a year for games to go over 10 million. I'm not sure I did the figures for last year, but I think for 2023, there were over 70 board game and role-playing game Kickstarters that raised over $1 million. And a lot that, raised, there's one I follow in particular that raised $250,000 and is yet to deliver anything. And people huff and make noises about it, but, sometimes, very occasionally, backers will get together and launch a lawsuit to get their money back, but it doesn't happen very often. I'm sure it will start happening the more it happens and the more high-profile ones go down. Anyway, I've talked enough. Let's have some questions.